Well, welcome everybody. My name is Charles McLean, and I'm delighted to be moderating what I expect would be a really interesting panel for this forum. The next decade of power, redefining global influence. That's a pretty general topic, but I think it's a relevant one. I think if we had had this forum a year or two ago, we would have defined global influence maybe in terms of military strength or economic strength. Perhaps we would have talked about geographic positioning. We might have talked about cultural strength, soft power. But I think that that's changing now, and it's changing pretty dramatically. I'm sorry? Ah. Let's ask for tech support. Can you hear me now? No. Okay. I guess I can lean into it this way, but it's a little awkward. We're talking about the various components of global influence. In the past, we might have talked about military strength, economic strength, geographic location, soft power, cultural strength. But I think that's changing quite dramatically now. We have a very interesting panel of some very expert advisors who can give us a little guidance on that, and I hope enlighten us a little bit. I'm going to throw out a question that I would ask all of them to respond to briefly, just 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion, I hope, among ourselves, culminating, I hope, in about 10 minutes of question and answers. So if you have some questions and you want to save them for the end, please do. We're going to try to allocate some time for that. Immediately to my left is Dr. David Apciauri, who is the General Director of the Georgian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He is also a professor at various universities. He's been an ambassador. He has a great deal of global political experience. Immediately to his left is Christoph Heusgen, who's the former chairman of the Munich Security Conference, and for 12 years was Angela Merkel's diplomatic advisor. To his left is David, now this could be tricky for me, David Viadze. I hope I'm close, David. I apologize if I'm... I'm close enough. He's vice president of the Swiss Forum for International Affairs. And then to his left, Bruno Fuchs, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the French National Assembly. And finally, David Frankopan, who is a professor of global history at Worcester College, University of Oxford, and the author of several books, one of which I managed to purchase at the last minute before I came, and he has also a great deal of expertise to offer. I'm going to ask everybody to give 2 or 3 minutes to describe what they think global influence will look like on a national level in 10 years, in 2035. So that is a chance to talk a little bit about the response to that question, but also to talk a little bit about some of the areas where the changes might be occurring in the years ahead. Let's start with you, David.
Good afternoon. I really appreciate for this excellent opportunity to be a part of this dialogue. And this is the second time I'm here in this very beautiful city. And many thanks to organizers, and my deep respect to the speakers and to the audience. And I will start also briefly. So I think we definitely understand that we live today in a different world. That is a matter of so many changes and so many realities that it's difficult to pave the way of the following everything. So in fact, everything is changing even on a weekly basis. So all the minds are occupied by how to understand that. And I think we understand that we live in a disorganized world. By the way, new term appeared when we speak about multinational form of cooperation, that in fact this multinational form of cooperation is a disorganized multipolar world with floating segments based on regional, interregional units floating simultaneously in one uncertain environment. But anyway, the question is, so what might be in future? I think you share this view that it's difficult to respond today. But in my view, by the way, the last question in our view was linked with, the necessity to at least response on the future of the world, what will be in future. Cooperation, still confrontation, and coercion, right? So I think in future we'll be witnessing, since this organized environment, in my view, will not be a matter of temporary climate, regrettably, because of many reasons. So we have to live in this environment. So both elements or both factors will be floating simultaneously, shoulder to shoulder. And that might be a reality, at least in my understanding. But what is the response? Which model will be probably efficient? And I think I will not be very extraordinary, making certain special statements in this respect. And I would say the balancing still. The policy of balancing, the strategy of balancing, and the path of compromises. This is the way, has always been recognized as a good way, so there will be more and more commonality in understanding that through that environment, we at least will be more or less in stable environment. Yeah. So this is my first reaction on that.
Christoph.
Yes, of course. There is every reason to be gloomy. I mean, when we look around, when we look across the Atlantic, we see, populism striving. We see nationalism striving, and not only there, in many parts of the world. We have no longer we have the impression the rule of law, but it's basically the rule of the jungle or the rule of the strongest, and this is the trend. I believe we can turn this around. And just coming here to Astana. So you come up here, you all came to this place, and what do you see outside? The logo of the United Nations. We have the first speech of the president here, underlining the need for the UN Charter and for the UN to strive. We have Ban Ki-moon here as a symbol for the UN, and also speaking out on something which hardly anybody speaks out anymore on climate change and what to do something. And so I believe, yes, we have this populism, but I think all these populist nations, we'll see this with US, we'll see this nationalists with Russia and others, there will be drawbacks, and they will find that actually they are shooting themselves in the foot. And I believe it's up to countries like my own, Germany, it's up to countries like Kazakhstan, like the famous middle powers, to get their act together, to work together. The European Union is key, but also other alliances of nations. European Union now is working for more than they've ever done before. So what was the success of the European, we are working on. And look at Kazakhstan. Probably most of you don't know this, but Kazakhstan is a founding member of the so-called Global Initiative. That's a number of countries that have now said, we want to work for the respect for international humanitarian law. We see how it's worldwide now being contested and violated, but no, we step up. Kazakhstan was one of the founding members with the ICRC to say we will want to have international humanitarian law respected. WTO, I mean, many business people are desperate, it doesn't work, the mechanisms don't work. There are now 50 countries which form the so-called MPIA. I said, well, within WTO, we do find mechanism when we have controversies to work together and go to have this arbitration courts working. So let's do and say, well, we defend the so-called rules-based order on the basis of the end, because this is what the world has benefited from. This is what the European Union has benefited from, and we don't strive on nationalism, on separating us from other countries. But let's work together, and we can do it.
An optimistic take. Thank you. David.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by saying what a great pleasure it is to be back in Astana at the Astana International Forum, and to see it grow and become stronger and even more interesting. I think before we try to answer the question, what will define power in 10 years, I think we need to take the lay of the land, and I think that's what my colleagues have been doing. It's clear that we're not living through some regular transition or your ordinary garden variety change of power or change of system, etc. We're living through an era where there's global change. It's a change of eras, which happens anywhere from 100 to 40 years, 50 years. As an example of what I'm talking about, think back to the beginning of the 20th century when oil became the main fuel for navies. That was a game changer. So I think our game changer now is clearly AI. I'm not starting by mentioning AI because I think it's the defining element, but it is the highest form of technical progress that that human society has reached. And it is not just technical progress, it is unpredictable where it may go. And since we don't have a good track record of guardrails, and together with AI, we keep forgetting, we say HI, human intelligence, but we keep forgetting another acronym, which is HN, which is human nature. That hasn't changed. And that human nature could drive this AI off the rails as it misused and mangled the previous technological breakthroughs. However, that's not the only aspect. The issue is that the entire structure, and let's be frank, the structure of the world, how member states are layered and so on, still is hierarchical. You have the so-called most powerful nations, however you want to define it. Then we have what we now start calling the middle powers. Before, part of them used to be the umbrella countries, others used to be affiliated with this or that pole. Today we have a major change in the waypoints. The waypoints, an aviation term which guides you. Okay, this is the waypoint. Then you go from there to here. That is changed, or they're switched off, or they are being switched off as we speak. So that leaves a lot of the countries basically flying blind. That is coming on the heels of the end of the bipolar world, the seeming end of the unipolar world. So we're now looking for what kind of world is this? Is this a multipolar world? Okay, but multipolarity without clear defined structures is inherently dangerous because it's unstable. And there's another sort of look at this, historic look. We have witnessed the 3 years ago, the end, a train wreck actually, of the first stage of post-Soviet transition. That didn't work, obviously. So I think we have that in front of us, a conundrum of how to handle that part. But let me finish with this. This hierarchy that I was talking about, usually, and the members of the world community are used to looking to one or the other pole, or now looking to the most, the top tier, let's put it that way. Many objections can be brought to this term. And they don't see a good example. So following the example of these countries that should be providing adult supervision, most countries are going off the multilateral mindset, not track, not organization, mindset, and moving increasingly towards national egotism. I can do it alone. I don't care what the others want, and we'll make it on our own. Or we will have smaller groups. Multilateralism hasn't entirely gone off the road. It has become smaller, small group multilateralism, like-minded groups. Incidentally, in my view, like-minded groups, this concept throughout the last decade or two was one of the concepts that basically did a bad turn to universal multilateralism. Because instead of thrashing it out, negotiating, engaging in diplomacy, what the Security Council, for example, should be doing, they went into like-minded groups. It's much easier to talk to like-minded members of a group. And that sapped the negotiations, the heavy horse trading. I'm sorry to speak a little too long, but that should be fine for your opener, I guess.
It's a good opener. Thank you, David. Bruno, how do you think global power is going to look different 10 years from now than it does now?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to share this moment with you. I try to be close to the microphone. I think the world will face two major fault lines. First one, as it was already explained, but maybe I can add so many things. It's the vision of the organization of the model of society the different countries have. We have, coming from Europe after the Second World War, we had the idea, perhaps it was an utopia, that the world shaped by the Second World War was gradually extend to the entire planet and give peace and prosperity to everybody. That was really the utopia we are starting to work on. And it works already because we had peace in Europe for about many decades. We have a lot of decline of it's a decline of poverty in the world. We have about 600 million Chinese people who went out of the poverty because of this mondialization and capitalism that give to everybody more capacity to live, and the reconstruction of Europe and lasting peace among democratic countries and powers. That was our reality for a moment. But we have to face a situation in the front. We have about 8% of people in the world living in democracy, in a complete democracy. That is a study from the Economist Intelligence Unit. And that means that it's very poor. Today, the democratic system is in danger, is a real danger. But if you ask questions to citizens living in Iran, living in Russia, living in North Korea, they all want to speak freely, to move wherever they want, and to respect the identity of the others. So they would like to live in such a world. You explained exactly the new world as the autocratic government want to impose to the citizen. And the second fault line that we have to face is the growing disconnected between governments and the people that claim to represent. The crisis of democratic legitimacy is real. Citizens across the globe are demanding accountability, transparency, and inclusion, and they are increasingly turning to protest, social movements, and the digital platforms to express themselves. In many cases, institutions is failing to keep peace. Meanwhile, new technology, AI, cyber capacity, autonomous weapons, and mass surveillance are amplifying both the power of the state and the voice of individual, but they are also introducing new risks: disinformation, digital repression, and even the erosion of truth itself. So that was the two main issues we have to face. The model of society we want to live in and want to live to our children, and also the capacity to represent the wants, the aspiration of the population. And we see in the world that those aspirations are less and less represented by the government. They should represent the aspiration.
Thank you, Bruno. Peter.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm a historian, so I'm going to be much more boring than my distinguished colleagues sitting next to me, who've spoken in very abstract terms about the future. History and policymakers, it's always about logistics and about reality and nitty-gritty. So I'll give a sort of a slightly different type of view to my colleagues. As several have said, it's a pleasure to be back here in Astana and in Kazakhstan, so thank you for having me. So look, first, it's important to mention climate change. Here in Kazakhstan, in March, you were 10 degrees above your average temperatures in an extreme heat wave that shocked many people in Kazakhstan, particularly because this came 12 months after the catastrophic floods that did so much damage to livelihoods here. Central Asia as a whole is warming faster than any other part of the world except the Arctic. So long-term sustainability in 10 years, it's are you able to manage water supplies in particular, glacier melt, water rights. The kinds of challenges that will require cooperation in this region are acute, particularly with things like glacier loss and heat islands. And a country the size of Kazakhstan is not all equal in this regard. But second, it's about more nuts and bolts of logistics. So most estimates assume that AI on its own is going to double our energy requirements in the next 5 years. I'm going to keep that as a separate category to climate change. I believe that scientists and my colleagues all around the world will find ways of mitigating, improving, becoming more sustainable, will find ways of market-based models that will incentivize and improve and hopefully solve some of these challenges. But those demands for the ability to generate power present questions about not just where that power comes from. You know, I've been following very closely the President's announcements about carbon neutral pathways here in Kazakhstan and how to balance oil, gas, coal, and so on. But it's about lots of the nitty-gritty, boring things that people don't like to hear about in presentations. My friend Dr. Cohen here will tell you everything is about access to materials and minerals, not just rare earths, which is something that we in the European Union are extremely overexcited about at the moment, with very good reason. That's why Ursula von der Leyen was here in Kazakhstan on what President Trump called Liberation Day. The fact that the President of the European Union was in Central Asia was very significant, I think, about the way in which our priorities are changing. But it's about how do you provide upgrades to power grids that enable you to even distribute electricity to the locations where they're needed. That requires things like copper. That requires things like pipelines. That requires transformers. That requires upgrades of grids. Those kinds of things are easy to forget, I think, when we talk about political models and middle powers. History, more interesting to read about great leaders, but it's always about logistics. It's about food and water. It's about sustainability. It's about finding the right locations for your cities. It's about finding structures that enable long-term success, which most governments, whether they are any different kind of democracies, there are lots of different kinds of democracies, even in Europe alone, there are lots of different kinds of models, and by and large, states want to have long-term viability. So it's how those outcomes get distributed, which is, I think, of great interest. So here in Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan 2030, Kazakhstan 2050, as national plans, seem to me, it doesn't mean that the answers are going to be right, but those seem to be the right kinds of questions. We in Europe don't have those plans. The United States doesn't have a long-term plan, and that makes the age of hardware and the age of logistics, unfortunately, an age of competition and an age of great state competition because of the colonization of resources in the same way that generations before us have done that too. Now, we might think we're more enlightened. We have tools for international law and other organizations, multilateral and others, to help regulate competition and cooperation. But that's not what reality looks like when people want what they want. So I think my starting point for a conversation about the next 10 years is what are those primary requirements from a very nuts and bolts logistical point of view. You can keep the list going, for example. Air pollution in Central Asia is catastrophic. Bishkek was 6 times above World Health Organization levels. The sandstorm in Tashkent 10 days ago that shut down flights led to deaths in the city. That's a reality of what today looks like. And we should be thinking about how do we mitigate, stand in the way of what some of those challenges look like in the coming years, and whether we as Europeans, as British people, as Americans, as Kazakhs, as Eastern Kazakhs, wherever we're from, whether we are all on the same page in trying to find those kinds of best possible outcomes. Thank you.
Peter, thank you. I'd like to, I'll start with you, Christoph, if I can. We're moving, it seems to me, from a multilateral world where economic integration was considered to be a prophylactic against war, and we're moving into a sphere of influence world where great power politics seem to be ascended. Who are going to be the winners and the losers in that context? And how will the middle powers like Kazakhstan fare?
I disagree that we are going into the direction, again, of the spheres of influence. There are trends there. If you put like the map where the Soviet Union was active, also in Asia and other countries, and you look at where Russia is having a Wagner troop, it's pretty much the same. So these kind of spheres influence what they're trying to do right now around Russia. Yes, but this is, for me, not the future. Also, when you see now the United States, how they have been moving, I mean, there's so much discussion right now about in Europe, will we continue to be able to rely on the US as it was in the past? And the response is no, we Europeans have to get our act together. And I come back to what I said before. We have to move with the middle powers, and as middle powers become more self-confident, and we get that when we do get our act together. The European Union is a big player worldwide on trade because they have majority decision in trade. In others they don't, but I think we will get there. Peter, I think you mentioned the problem of water. I mean, if I'm not wrong, the 5 Central Asian countries have a few years ago even almost fought war around water, but they have finally come together. The OSCE, by the way, has helped doing this, and they have recognized we have to work together on this. I told you about the WTO. We have not been able to resolve any problems. Now, 45 countries have put themselves together and say, okay, we will have a mechanism where we resolve our problems between us. So I think that's a way forward, that the middle powers don't stand there and wait what the big guys are doing, but assume responsibility. And then, of course, we have to fight populism. Our population is now, the governments have to react very, very fast. But it's also sometimes a problem of the governments that they, in their election campaigns, just promise everything and they will do such and such in such a short term. And it doesn't work, and then the people are dissatisfied and populists come. So also when governments are there, they have to be realistic. I think people understand that things cannot be changed so quickly. So I think one should be a bit more realistic, and sometimes one should do like Churchill and say, listen, blood, sweat, and tears. This is what we are needed. In Germany, after Russia's invasion in Ukraine, our former Chancellor Scholz gave a Zeitenwende, change of time speech, where he said we have to do 1, 2, 3, very tough. He got 80% approval rate. So why not? I think people understand that things are not that easy. So don't promise them if you cannot deliver. And if democratic governments in general deliver on what they said, I think that's the end of populists.
Peter, you brought up the climate issue. I'd like to explore that a little bit. Climate change is obviously going to produce climate migrants. People are moving out of unsustainable environments into more sustainable environments. How is that going to shift the geopolitical landscape in the future? How is that going to affect power?
I think the first thing I'd say with great respect, Mr. Chairman, is that that's not what the data tells us. People don't migrate away from climate pressure. That sounds logical. It sounds like they probably do, but they don't. So property prices in the south of France are higher than they've ever been. The number of migrants moving inside the United States to Florida and into fire-ridden parts of California has gone upwards rather than downwards. It's a completely logical thing to think that people will move. Historically, when there are climate pressures and climate stresses, this is something I've written about, people don't move in mass migrations. They try to stay close to their family homes. They normally either then starve, sometimes to death, or they're prevented from moving. And we can look, for example, at the population of Gaza for an exact example of this. People don't want to go and live in a different country just because they think that the odds are against them, and that suffering can be acute and terrible. And unfortunately, that's one of the great lessons of history going back many thousands of years. So the idea that suddenly people get on planes or bring carts or cars and move sounds logical, but in fact what happens with climate pressure is you find food shortages, you find inflationary pressure, you find hoarding, and then you find civil breakdown. In the worst case scenarios, that leads to revolution and war, and lethality events that in some cases produce 40 to 50% of population loss. So it would be theoretically right to have a conversation about what does migration look like, but there is no previous example in history where that has happened in a way that looks like anything that the philosophical view of today looks like. So I would stick with what I know, which is evidence-led, and that would mean that people will need to try and find local solutions.
So just to follow up on that, would you expect that essentially climate change will be power neutral in the future, or will there be implications that we aren't anticipating?
The short answer is that if climate models, we're now above 1.5, if they move in the direction that France is currently planning a model in case to anticipate change of temperatures up to 4 degrees by the end of the century, above Industrial Revolution levels, we're at the dawn of one of the great humanitarian catastrophes in human histories. There is no question about that. We have more people on this planet than ever before. We have increasing pressures on water and calorie productions, and to find a way to avoid the rocks of what look like are likely to happen, we need to have a global commons that allows us to solve problems collaboratively. So one of those questions is, what do multilateral organizations in the future look like? What does the reform of the United Nations, for example, look like? But in practice, where you have significant pressures in the three most climate-stressed parts on Earth are the Gulf region, where there's financial capability to mitigate, South Asia, particularly the southern part of India, where the population is about 500 million people, already at extreme risk, and then in parts of China too, where water shortages is acute. The single largest infrastructure project in the world at the moment is diverting water from the southern part of China to the north, where average amounts of water are about 20% of what's required. So you can solve through technology, you can solve through investment, you can solve through planning, but you can't beat nature and you can't beat the Grim Reaper. So you need to understand that, and if you understand that, then you maybe make decisions differently. So this blip we've had for the last 30 years of a very sharp decline in global poverty, as the panel have mentioned, of limited amounts of very serious interstate conflicts, notwithstanding Yugoslavia, Rwanda, genocide, Palestine, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Iraq, but that, from a historian's point of view, is exceptional. And if you believe that we are smarter than our ancestors, then maybe the world will get better. But we should be thinking quite hard about what those humanitarian challenges look like in terms of just food resilience. For example, how many states in Europe stockpile enough food to be able to get through a winter? And I can tell you the answer is none. In Europe, we're already 25% of the continent water stressed. So there should be national resilience plans that aren't just about how do we find critical minerals to improve our weapons capacity and our defense industries. It goes much deeper through what are those realities of logistics, of calories, of water, and of a world that is highly competitive, where you can be spent out by people with deeper pockets.
Yes.
Very briefly, can I contest that? I mean, you must have studies about the Sahel where you have the herders and the farmers getting cross with each other because people leave those, those farms where they cannot farm anymore. Same with the U.S. You have now parts in California or Florida where insurance companies don't give house insurance anymore. And I mean, for Americans who have most of their fortune in their real estate, if this is no longer insured, banks will not give a credit. You move away. So I think there are movements. Of course, you have to have certain incentives or mechanisms, but I think that people just stay like this. And sorry, for Gaza is something totally different. It's war. And that people are not ready to leave because in a war they're driven out and this and nobody will accept. You cannot compare that.
What have we done in Europe to allow refugees to come from Gaza to our own continent? In the face of a current humanitarian crisis, what have we done in Europe? All the Gulf states. It's not just a European. Gaza is not a European problem alone, but the global community has been static in the ability to try to find safe havens for people who are under huge privation. And I suspect that is a model that when we find populations in similar levels of stress, like in South Sudan, for example, at the moment, or in the belt that goes from the Democratic Republic of Congo right the way through to East Africa, where we have about 300 million people facing acute food and water poverty, then there's very little ability for the rest of the world, whether the middle powers or great powers, to take a role in trying to mitigate. And those populations are not, by and large, moving. You find small populations who are typically elite. They're young men who try to find a way to find their labour that can be monetised, and then they remit. So, for example, in Central Asia, across all the Central Asian states, particularly Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, almost half of the country's GDP is from remittances of people working in particularly places like Russia, sending money back home. So migration is a form of trying to help people back at home, trying to stay close to their families. That's the reality.
I would like to not necessarily dwell entirely on the climate issue, but I would like to try to see if we can broaden that to what role the international institutions might have in addressing questions like that. Because clearly something like climate change, it may affect each individual nation differently, but it affects almost every nation in the world right now. David Chikviadze, if you can just comment from your former UN perch, give us an idea about how multilateral institutions will fare in terms of global influence in the next decade.
Thank you very much, Charles. Let me predicate what I'm going to say by offering a couple of definitions. Because we often hear the acronym UN or the term United Nations has failed here or succeeded there. What will the international organizations do to reform themselves? How will multilateralism, and that word is often used interchangeably with international organizations, especially the universal one. Let me just try to clarify something on the tail end of over 30 years in the UN, after which I still believe in the organization fervently. I think the organization, if it didn't exist, would have to be invented, except in our day and age, it probably wouldn't have been invented. But the issue is that, when I joined the UN in January 93, it was on the tail end of Bill Clinton had just been inaugurated president. And he won his presidential campaign under the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." And, I've been colored by that, and also not least by the fact that when I went into the building, one of my colleagues next to me had a big slogan blown up over his office desk saying, "It's the member states, stupid." If we do not remember that it is the member states of the United Nations who created the organization, who set its goals 80 years ago, and who run the organization, we are going to be misunderstanding the problem and what's the term, medical term? Diagnosing and giving the wrong medication. The United Nations organization is many things. So when we talk about this, we have to make it clear to everybody who's listening, or to ourselves initially, who are we talking about? The UN failed here. Why doesn't the UN, I've heard this all the time, why hasn't the UN been able to stop the war in Syria? Why can't the UN stop the war in Ukraine? Somebody recently asked me, why doesn't the UN show up earlier? And I explained to people, the UN, meaning the Secretariat, meaning the Secretary General, this is the usual misunderstanding. The UN cannot just show up, quote unquote, earlier. In order for the UN to show up earlier, the Security Council needs to be seized of the matter. It needs to discuss the matter ad nauseum. It has to find a way to horse trade, negotiate, and come to a decision, not put in blue a resolution text that has not been discussed with the other side in order to score points, but to come to a negotiated resolution text, adopt it, put in that text the paragraph that says, request the Secretary General to do X, Y, and Z. And after that's done, the UN needs another resolution which provides the finances and the logistics for that first resolution. Only after that can we show up. I'll give you an example. I was backstopping a colleague in 1994 who was dealing with the Great Lakes of Africa, and this was end of March. He said, look, I'm burned out. It's been a long time. I need to take 3 weeks off. I said, sure. So we used to back each other up. 6th of April, a plane is shot down with 2 presidents and all hell breaks loose. 800,000 people are killed. And I would go to the Security Council, both, listening in I was a junior officer, but listening into the consultations of the whole in that little room, and formal meetings. For 1 week, when 30,000 people roughly were being killed, macheted to death, or if you had a little money, you could buy a bullet, and were thrown into Lake Kivu. The member states in the Security Council were discussing, so how do we go in, who provides the transport, who provides the logistics, and then what's the sunset clause? And this is in response to Secretary General Boutros-Ghali going down to the Security Council and saying, please give me 5,000 heavily armed troops to go in and stop the carnage. Instead of saying, no, Secretary General, we're going to give you 25,000 heavily armed troops, we're going to provide the transportation and give you a free hand, go in and do the job. They were discussing what's the sunset clause and who's going to provide the heavy lift. So you see, it's all very well to blame, and I'm not being defensive, I don't work there anymore, but it's just a matter of fairness. And today, when we hear the UN has to reform to be, I hate this term in particular, to be fit for purpose. Excuse me, have you actually described what the purpose is 80 years from its creation? Has anybody reevaluated the organization? Or in reality, have the permanent 5 members to keep the UN out of its national security business, have they given the UN every possible kind of job, from vaccinations to plowing the fields to, talking about this and that, in order for them not to be taking particular interest in a security situation. And yet, peace and security is why this organization was created in 1944-45. So today, if that's not what you want the UN to do, please redefine it. You're the ones, but don't ask the organization to reform itself. It's been reforming itself for at least over 30 years that I've been there. Every year, every Secretary General reforms it. It is the member states who are lacking today the multilateral mindset to use the organization that they have and work through it. That's the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I want to allow a little bit of time for Q&A, but I would like to go through the panel for a quick answer to a simple question. Bruno?
Very, very quickly, to follow the two last the speakers. If you want to solve and resolve these vital issues like water, AI, or climate, it's impossible to do it country by country. That means that we need absolutely to go through this issue by a multilateral approach, by cooperation approach. And in the United Nations, for the moment, we have big powers. They are, at the moment, following their own interest. They're not following the world interest anymore. We have to face this. A big part of the member of the United Nations working on their own interest, trying, and some of them, like the administration of President Trump, they are increasing the difficulties and the danger for the citizens. So we absolutely need to find and to redefine a new sociology of multilateralism, and it can start in Astana. The speech of the Kazakh president this morning was very clear on this. We have to start with middle power, and everybody, all the other power, they want to start this new multilateralism, and you only can be in cooperation with people who want to cooperate. And we see, for example, in the Council of Security, Russians and Americans working together against Ukraine. So it blocked completely the system because it was something that was impossible due to the value few months or few years ago. So we need to reinvent a new way to cooperate between the countries. They want to cooperate and they want to have the same vision of the world we will leave to our children.
Thank you, Bruno. This is the quick last question for everybody on the panel. If you can make a quick answer to the question, are we moving toward a more cooperative world in the next 10 years or a more competitive one? How do you see it in general terms? David. First, David.
Number one. So just as a brief response, I think we're moving towards segments in terms of structural involvement, cooperation. Anyway, the regional approach, the regional cooperation, and updated forms of cooperation as middle powers, in my view, will be prevailing for next decade. And it's been mentioned, by the way, today at a very interesting speech by the President of the European Council today. Also, he mentioned that probably we'll be witnessing in future the sum up of original, we would say, forms of cooperation. I have no response whether it is the best way, but no doubt new approaches will be a matter of practice, in my view. One very brief amendment regarding middle powers here. I can give you one positive case if you take this opportunity here. We definitely updating a new, I would say, content of middle power. It's not a new phenomenon, but it's updating quite rapidly and quite interestingly. And I would say that also in future, in terms of this new model of appearance, I mean, it's national relations here. The commercialization of relations based on the economic motivation, based on the benefits, I think will be a very interesting cementing element for future cooperation. That's why this project might be a matter of interest. So more commerce, more benefits in order to channel the business-based partnership in order to minimize the risk of global confrontation. It's a reality. And by the way, if we consider this project, have a look. Global players, regional players, smaller players, producers, transit countries, all kinds of activities, they are in one basket. And everybody, in fact, except minor exceptions here, they are more or less positive in that way. So I think the project approach will be dominating in future, especially for the countries that are located between East and West, that are linked the distant marketplaces. And that's why, again, I'm saying that it might be definitely, if not kind of recipe for the resolution of all multilateral or all-level problems, that might be definitely quite interesting in future.
Thank you, David. This is a lightning round, so let's quickly give me an answer as to whether you see a more competitive or a more cooperative world. Christoph.
We certainly have a more competitive or even confrontational policy that we see by Russia, that we see by the US right now. But I still believe that the future belongs to a more cooperative system. And I would like to see some French friends here on the. I might remember them that during the last German government, the one before, there was the French foreign minister at the time, Yves Le Drian, and the German foreign minister Heiko Maas created an alliance for multilateralism, and they got up to 100 countries joining this, and then it was stopped by the following government. But I see a future in this, that the middle powers, the countries that believe in cooperation, that they know you get stronger when you work together, when you see that the interests of your country and your partner are best served when you look at both interests and not only. So I was from the very beginning optimistic. I think under this pressure that we are now, and we have a surprise by by the US every day. It's very good for German, French, European, Kazakh universities that no foreigner will go to the US anymore. I mean, this is also for us, some of us, good news that we will strive in our universities soon. So let's see the positive things, and let's see that the middle powers work together. And we started here in Kazakhstan.
Christoph, I absolutely love your optimism. David, number 2, lightning round. More competitive or more cooperative?
Thank you. Very briefly, humanity has always returned to the multilateral way of doing business, but only after it either sleepwalked into or charged into some catastrophic event. Westphalian Accords came after the 100-year war, 30-year war. Same with the Congress of Vienna, same with the Paris Conference, same with Dumbarton Oaks and San Francisco. So I would like to be optimistic that we the world, collectively will be able to get back on an even keel and get back to the multilateral machinery that we've created, to using it, but for that we need the multilateral mindset. But here's the trick. We need to do it without charging or wandering or blundering into another catastrophe, because in this day and age, with the weaponry that we have, that catastrophe could well be our last as a functioning little planet. Therein lies the conundrum for the world today. Thank you.
Bruno?
Yeah, I would answer competitive to create value and cooperative to share and organize the way to live together. But I'm not so optimistic as far as I was a journalist formerly. So as far as I see the evolution of the governance of the countries. I'm not so optimistic. I think it's going worse and worse, unless, as I said, the countries who want to be in a cooperative way, they accelerate the way and they work together and they show and demonstrate to the others this is the best way to proceed and not the way to take care of their own interest. And then on the multilateral to reorganize and reinvent this multilateralism, I think we should introduce a new category of people, like a scientist, like entrepreneur, like a non-governmental organization. It's impossible to stay just with the president of countries. It doesn't work. So we have to change the way to see the multilateralism, to represent much more the citizens and not to present it at the moment. Not enough, I would say.
Thank you, Bruno. Patrick, you get the last word. Are you, as a historian, optimistic, or are you pessimistic? Cooperation or competition?
Historians are not in the business of emotions. I'm not here to be optimistic or pessimistic. I'm very heartened that such distinguished speakers will speak about hope. I think it's really important as a message to remind that we have choices. But I should also remind competition is not in itself bad. The greatest part of the 20th century saw the American boom as a result of the United States having a very good peer competitor that forced it to innovate. So competition in itself is not the problem. Cooperation doesn't necessarily also solve problems. Of the signatories of the Paris Accords, of the countries in the 20 largest economies in the world, not a single one has kept up to its commitments that it gave in 2015 by 2023. So we can blame Trump and say he's saying drill, but the rest of us are not cashing the checks that we promised that we had the resources for. So collaboration, it depends what that means. Cooperation depends what it means. It's about outcomes. I think history is about understanding what are the consequences and trying to prepare for those. So I'd like to say I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic. The job is to be pragmatic, to work out what are the problems you're trying to solve and how to see whether you're doing better than expected or worse than expected.
That's a great note to end on, and I'm apologizing for us running over as we kind of expected we would, but I would love to take one or two questions from the audience if you have one. Yes? Anybody want to comment on that? Bruno?
Maybe a few words. I mean, you're completely right. I share completely your point of view. So that's why we have to organize themselves. We have to try to regulate the digital platform, because you have a lot of disinformation that completely makes the public debate impossible, because everybody has their own reality. It's impossible to share reality. You have to face 2 different or 3 different realities. So we have many things to organize, and maybe to try to have maybe a positive thought. Maybe 1 or 2 examples of our authoritarian model. We have, everybody, we know a lot of them in the world, will make a crash. So maybe the citizens will be aware of the wrong way to follow some populists, some nationalists or sovereignists. Maybe this is the only way for me in the next years to have this positive thing. We have a wrong example of what nationalism can provoke. Maybe that could be. Okay, I want to be short, so I stop on this.
One more. Yes. Just shout.
Okay, no problem. Ariel Cohen, the Atlantic Council, a terrific panel. However, my perception of what I heard was that with the exception of a very poignant warning about climate change, the gentleman from the UK hit the nail on the head because we're facing potentially a big war. In Europe, we're facing an unresolved problem with the Iranian nuclear program. We're facing Chinese aspirations vis-a-vis Taiwan. And with that, with respect, I'm afraid the European model that relies on trade and human rights does not have the instruments right now to address these challenges. And I agree with the gentleman, we may be facing a situation that the price that the world is going to pay to create the next iteration of a cooperative order is going to be exorbitantly high. Would you care to comment on that? Thank you.
Christoph.
No, I'm happy to comment that. First on Russia, yes, there is this danger, but at the same time, as a European, having followed now also the policy of the US where you cannot 100% rely on them anymore, I think under this pressure, finally Europeans get their act together with very resilient Ukrainians. I tell you, I think that Vladimir Putin, who thinks that he has more staying power, I think will be mistaken. On Iran, the Europeans actually provided several models, or in 2005, the JCPOA, which was then always destroyed by US governments. And there I have to admit, it's for the Europeans alone to solve the Iranian problem. It's not possible. With China, I think we need to see that we see how we work with them, not confrontational, work with them, see that they also see how important it is to go by rules. I think the verdict is still out, but the confrontational path that we see in the U.S. administration is not necessarily one that the whole world needs to follow. This is again why we need middle powers to stand up, speak for the rule of law, give an example, and have others then in the end follow.
I want to thank our distinguished panel. Well done. And I thank all of you for attending and listening carefully. I wish we had a little bit more time for Q&A, but good discussion, so thank you very much.